A major data breach has meant that the locations of domestic abuse victims have fallen into the hands of their alleged abusers. The breaches took place at multiple organisations, including an NHS trust, a police service, a government department and local councils. In one case, the home address of two adopted children was handed over to their birth father, who was in prison on 3 counts of raping their mother. Joining me live now is the CEO of Women's Aid, Farah Nazeer, and also Professor Kevin Curran, an expert in cybersecurity. Thank you both for joining me. Let's start with Farah. I mean, the crucial point here is that these are women and children predominantly who need to be protected from their oppressors and aggressors. And the most important thing to protect is their address and their whereabouts, so they can't be found and they can't be attacked and they can be kept safe. You would have thought this was page 1, lesson 1, wouldn't you, of domestic abuse and, you know, women and children who've had to flee for their own safety and flee for their lives. I can't believe that this has happened repeatedly in so many different organisations. What do you think has gone so terribly wrong, Farah?
Well, I think just really to emphasise everything you've said, it's utterly shocking that these institutions, you're talking about institutions like, like health trusts, law firms, courts, these institutions that are designed to protect women and children fleeing from perpetrators of domestic abuse are releasing their addresses. Now, I think it's really important to recognise the context, because the context is that 3 women every fortnight are murdered by a current or former partner. And that is a very serious context within which to be releasing details like addresses into. And I think the fundamental issue here is culture and training, because where you have these institutions, these organisations that aren't really thinking about domestic abuse, that aren't really giving that information, those details about that survivor, the due sort of the due consideration that they need, it's because they don't really understand domestic abuse. They haven't taken the time, the institutions haven't taken the time to train people to actually understand what the context is like for domestic abuse and how that information really needs to be safeguarded. And then, of course, there's a whole host of other very basic things that one would hope are in place for institutions like that. Double checking, ensuring appropriate access, and all manner of sort of 101 interventions to ensure that information is safe. But it is absolutely not acceptable. And often this sort of information with these examples is given at sometimes the most dangerous time for women and children, which is when they've just left the perpetrator.
I mean, the whole thing is just unbelievable, and yet it's true. And the thing that's so astounding is that it should have happened in police environments, in NHS environments, in legal environments, where you would have thought that the personnel responsible would be thoroughly clued up. They know exactly what they were dealing with. It's not like it happened at the Milk Marketing Board and it happened in a branch of Primark, where, of course, the staff aren't trained to know what they're talking about in terms of domestic abuse. These are arenas where that's what they exist to help to prevent. That's what's so unfathomable. Plus, in all these instances, you can't just put it down, can you, to a technological failing. They pushed a button and they sent it to all and there's something wrong with the computer programme. It's not as simple or as complicated as that, is it?
Not at all. I mean, when I think of the sort of instances that we have to deal with through our helpline, our live chat service, we're talking about sort of police who are releasing details through interviewing a perpetrator. We're talking about family courts disclosing. We're talking about all manner of incidents like that, where, these institutions should really know better. Domestic abuse or this form of crime should be their bread and butter. We're talking about social services. I mean, one instance was absolutely, it's all horrific, but one instance recently is where a woman came to us. We had to move her immediately into a different refuge because social services had released details to a perpetrator who had threatened to kill her and use extreme violence. So this is very, very serious from agencies that really should know better and really should be investing in the training by domestic abuse organisations to actually understand the way that perpetrators will aim to get this sort of data, this sort of information, and able to put in place the restrictions and the protections around this data.
Let's bring Professor Kevin Curran into this. He's an expert on cybersecurity. Obviously, this is the ultimate. This is the potentially life-threatening mistake of giving the address of a wife and children who've fled domestic abuse to the abuser. It just couldn't be more serious. Is it to do with the breach of cybersecurity, or is it to do with just incompetence or lack of imagination or empathy or training?
Yeah, I put my finger on training. Of course, it is a nightmare for people who are vulnerable, and then that these details are leaked. But again, we have the domestic violence disclosure schemes as well, which follow from the Domestic Abuse Act, again, which allow police authorities to release data information, either in response to a partner trying to decide if someone was violent, or the police can also make a decision on this. Again, so to protect someone that they feel is vulnerable again. So again, but ultimately it comes down to training here, where people were disclosing information really which they should not have done, and they are vulnerable. Of course, again, we're entering into technological era again, where domestic abuse victims again obviously flee a home, they go to a safe refuge. And not getting off the point, but I'd like to say that anyone who is a domestic abuse survivor should review any connected accounts they have. There's been cases where people have logged in a safe refuge. Women have logged into Netflix, for instance, and because it's still connected to the partner's account, it gives away the location. And again, there's been cases where people have had baby monitors as well, and because it's connected to the partner or the nest, whatever, they can see, or even a malicious partner can give devices to children of domestic abuse survivors again, and they can be tracked again. So really what I would say is to review all your devices that you have when you're escaping a circumstance like this again, and literally buy a burner phone, buy a new phone, change your email address, disconnect everything and start again, because even though this of course is a nightmare for disclosure again from the authorities and from the people who should know better, but there are things that people have to think about in this new age where we have so many devices again, because of course you want to be safe, and you can be tracked in so many ways by someone without someone obviously putting spyware on your phone, but just by having connected accounts, because you could be with that partner for 10, 20 years and you forget how many devices you share, how many accounts you share, and geographical location is shared on so many devices.
Professor, thank you very much indeed. Finally, Farah, how are you going to get this message across? You can hardly overhaul personally or with the help of your organisation, with the most willing vigour in the world, the training processes at the NHS, within the police, in legal firms. You can't do it all by yourself, even with the best will in the world. So what can be done about this to wake people up?
Well, I think the Information Commissioner's reprimands are a really good start. And I really am hoping that these reprimands, and we will be pushing on these authorities together with the Information Commissioner to actually think about the kind of training and the kind of processes that they have in place to protect data and information, and make it very, very clear it's absolutely their bread and butter to ensure there's proper training from a domestic abuse organisation who understands the context, understands the way that perpetrators will behave and try and extract this information. And these institutions that we're talking about, health, social care, policing, they need to take it seriously. We need a cultural change where they understand that domestic abuse is a heinous crime and needs to be prioritised, and they need to take up the training and put in place the protections, because ultimately these institutions exist to protect victims of domestic abuse. No two ways about it. And yes, women can do lots of things to support themselves, and we work with lots of survivors and they will always do everything they can to support themselves. But these institutions are there to protect them, and they need to take this seriously.